The next thing that we're going to study in this chapter is important aspects of international trade. Now, the first thing, important aspects की जब हम बात करते हैं, so these are basically just certain terms related to international trade that we need to know. The first one is volume of trade. Volume of trade is nothing but the actual tonnage of goods. तो volume मतलब कितना goods जो है वो trade हो रहा है, उसका हम weight measure करते हैं in tons, and that is the that basically forms the volume. But इस चीज के साथ दिक्कत ये है कि हम services को जो है उनको measure नहीं कर सकते हैं. We cannot weigh services, right? So that is why what we do is, when we talk about volume of goods, we take the total value of goods and services traded, and by total value we mean the money value of goods and services traded. So जब हम since we now have a unit of measurement that's suitable for both goods and services, so we express the volume of goods in that unit, in that suitable unit, which is money. तो हम इनका money value measure करते हैं in order to find out कि कितना trade हुआ है. We take the money value of the amount of the number of goods which have been traded, and the amount of services which have been traded between countries, and that forms the volume of goods. The thing about the volume of trade is that it has been steadily rising over the past decade. So the volume of trade, the volume of international trade is on a steady rise, which basically means कि ट्रेड जो है, इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड जो है वो पहले कम होती थी और अब बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ने लगी है. नाउ there's more and more trade going on between countries at the international level, which was not very predominant earlier. So that's volume of trade. The next thing is composition of trade, and by composition of trade again we mean the nature of goods and services, कि कैसे goods and services जो है कैसे वो what kind of goods and services are being traded, which is something that we looked at when we did this third basis of international trade, which is the stage of economic development. तो composition हम देखते हैं. The thing about the composition of trade is that पहले जो है ट्रेडिंग प्रोडक्ट्स का नेचर कुछ और होता था. पहले प्राइमरी गुड्स पे ट्रेड होता था, उसके बाद जो है मैन्युफैक्चरिंग प्रोडक्ट्स पे ट्रेड होने लगा, एंड नाउ वी सी दैट there's a demand for services. Now, even though there's also a demand for manufacturing goods, but also simultaneously there's also a demand for services which is being traded across countries. So primary goods were earlier dominant in international trade. So earlier dominant in international trade, just by primary goods we mean agricultural products. Agricultural products as in agricultural output, and goods, those machines and equipments that you would need in for being able to enhance agricultural productivity. So वो है primary goods. The second thing is manufacturing sector now commands the bulk of international trade. तो पहले प्राइमरी गुड्स पे ज्यादा ट्रेड होता था, अब मैन्युफैक्चरिंग गुड्स हैव रिप्लेस्ड प्राइमरी प्रोडक्ट्स, एंड दीज आर नाउ द मोर डोमिनेंट प्रोडक्ट्स ऑफ इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड. Also, service sector is showing an upward trend in international trade. By service sector, what we mean is services. Services का बहुत ज़्यादा trade होने लगा है, and in order to, if we talk about a few examples of services, we can say transportation, communication, right? So transportation, communication, etc. are certain examples of services which are being traded worldwide, and which are also showing a high demand in international trade, right? So that's composition of trade, which is basically nothing but the nature of goods and services that are being traded worldwide. The third thing is direction of trade. Direction of trade में हम देखते हैं कि trade किस तरफ से किस तरफ move कर रहा है. So we're basically tracking the movement of goods and services, right? We're seeing कि which parts of the country are exporting more stuff, and which parts of the world are exporting more, and which parts of the world are importing more, right? So in direction of trade, we see the movement of goods and services. Right, so when we talk about the history of direction of trade, what we see is developing countries used to export valuable items to Europe. तो आज के टाइम के जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज है वो जो है ये कंट्रीज पहले बहुत डोमिनेंट थी ट्रेड में, क्योंकि ये कंट्रीज जो है वो रॉ मटेरियल्स एक्सपोर्ट करती थी, बट सिंस दीज आर कंट्रीज which are technologically lagging behind, but these are countries very rich in raw materials. So these countries used to export valuable raw materials to European countries, right? To countries of Europe. But then there was a reversal in the direction of trade, and what happened is during the 19th century Europe exported manufactured goods. So because industrialization happened in Europe, so this is basically the result of industrialization happening in Europe. Industrialization happening in Europe. So there was a reversal in the direction of trade, and Europe now started exporting more and importing less, even though it used to import raw materials from whatever colonies it had acquired, but then the value of those raw materials, the value of those imports was far lesser than the value of these manufactured goods that it used to sell to basically to its colonies and to other markets, right? Also, Europe and US emerged as major trading partners. So Europe or US, to countries of Europe and the United States of America were the first nations that were able to witness industrial development, and these became major trading partners, and they also became leaders of trade in manufactured goods during this point of time, right? So earlier it was developing countries, countries which are today developing countries. These countries used to dominate international trade. Then because of industrialization, Europe started exporting manufactured goods, in Europe and US became trading partners and also became leaders of world trade in manufactured goods. Again, in the late 20th century, or in the second half of the 20th century, there was another reversal in the direction of trade, and what happened was Europe lost its colonies, and also India, China and other developing countries started competing with developed countries, right? So पहले एक direction follow होता था trade में, then there was a reversal in the direction of trade जब ये developing countries जो ये पीछे रहने लगे, और क्योंकि इन्होंने industrialization नहीं देखा था, European countries में industrialization हो रहा था और इसीलिए वो manufactured goods ज़्यादा export कर पा रहे थे. Then Europe started losing its colonies, and this means that it started losing its markets, and also there was now industrialization in other, because it lost its colonies and was no longer able to control the economies of these colonies. That's why these people were now able to set up they were now free to set up their own industries, because जितने दिन यूरोप ने इन सारे countries को colonize कर रखा था, so Britain and even other powers, other colonial powers made sure that they basically destroyed the traditional industries, and they never allowed industrial development to happen. Happen in these countries. So now after Europe lost its colonies, now there was industrial development in these countries, and so certain developing countries like India was a developing country, so these now started seeing a phase of industrial development, and these started competing with developed countries, which were European countries and US. So also China has become power to reckon with. China is probably the second largest, or maybe it has become the largest economy of the world today after US. And even India is the fourth largest economy of the world today, and so these countries have come a long way from what they were earlier, and this just shows that there's always a change in the pattern or change in the direction of trade that's happening internationally. The last thing that we're going to study is something related to a bit of economics. It's balance of trade. तो balance of trade क्या कहता है? Balance of trade basically records volumes of imports and exports. ये देखता है कि कितने goods और services जो है कितना export किया गया है, कितना import किया गया है, right? क्योंकि if imports are greater than exports, if a country is importing more and more and exporting very less, this means what? The first thing, technically, it means that there is a negative or unfavorable balance of trade. In order to have a favorable balance of trade, in order to be a good position economically, a country should always try to export more and import less, because then it means that since it's exporting more, it's earning more money by selling its goods, and it's spending less money by buying goods from other countries. So there's always a surplus income that it's able to keep when it exports some more. But when imports are more than exports, there's negative or unfavorable balance of trade, which means that the country spends more than it earns. It's actually spending more on the imports than it's earning from the exports. And this will lead to an exhaustion of its financial resources, because if it's not earning money and if it's spending more money, then there will come a point when it will have no more money to import goods. So that is why industrial development is important for each country, because every country should be self-sufficient and it should be able to, it should be able to at least produce the basic necessary goods that it needs, right? So that's what balance of trade is. Balance of trade में हम ये देखते हैं कि कितना import हो रहा है, कितना export हो रहा है, और जो है if imports are more than exports, we call this a negative or unfavorable balance of trade. Similarly, if exports are more than imports, so this is called a positive balance of trade or a favorable balance of trade, right? So this is something that every country would want to achieve. This is like a good thing, right? Economically, this makes a country better off. So balance of trade, and this is important because no country would want to lag behind, and no country would want to lose its money when it's participating in international trade. That's why it's a very important concept, and it's something that one should be very familiar with.